The greatest honor in the history of the Medici family is that they produced two French queens. Today, we will look at the story of the first French queen from the Medici family, Caterina de' Medici, or Catherine de' Medicis. Caterina experienced great hardships during her childhood. As a young girl, Caterina nearly became a victim of rape and murder at the hands of enraged Florentine soldiers. How did she escape this fate? Let's find out. First, let us trace where Caterina fits into the Medici family. When Caterina was born, the Medici family already had a pope among their ranks. Her great-uncle was the reigning Pope Leo X. Her great-grandfather was Lorenzo the Magnificent. During Lorenzo's time, the Renaissance reached its peak in Florence. But after Lorenzo's untimely death, Florence descended into a great turmoil. Lorenzo had three sons, Piero, Giovanni, and Giuliano, and his younger brother Giuliano, who tragically died in the Pazzi conspiracy, left behind an illegitimate son, Giulio. Including Giulio, Lorenzo raised 4 children as if they were his own. Piero, Lorenzo's eldest son, became the Lord of Florence at the age of 24, the same age his father became the leader of Florence. But Piero lacked any experience in governing a city and was excessively arrogant, and the family lost control of Florence and was exiled. Meanwhile, Giovanni, Lorenzo's second son, and Giulio, Giuliano's son, became cardinals of the Catholic Church and later ascended to the papacy one after the other. This paved the way for the Medici family's eventual resurgence. Now, let us trace further down from the generation of Piero, Giovanni, Giuliano, and Giulio. Piero fathered Lorenzo II, while Giovanni and Giulio, being the Catholic priests, could not have children. Giuliano had an illegitimate son before his marriage, Ippolito. In addition to Ippolito, there was another male member of the family in this generation, and that was Alessandro, who was 1 year older than Ippolito. Alessandro's portrait reveals a mixed racial heritage, with his mother having the African ancestry. Officially, Alessandro was the son of Lorenzo II, but many believe that he was actually the son of Giulio, who later became Pope Clement VII. At the time, Giulio was a cardinal and could not publicly acknowledge a child, so he entrusted Alessandro to his nephew Lorenzo II to claim Alessandro as his son. So where does Caterina fit into this lineage? Caterina was the daughter of Lorenzo II, Piero's son. So Alessandro was Caterina's uncle in reality, but at least officially he was her brother. Caterina's mother was a French noblewoman, Madeleine de la Tour d'Auvergne. Now, after the Medici family was driven out of Florence during the time of Piero de' Medici, the Dominican monk Girolamo Savonarola controlled Florence for a bit, as we saw in our previous videos. After Savonarola was executed, Florence was under the rule of Piero Soderini for a short while. But then, in 1512, Cardinal Giovanni de' Medici, the younger brother of Piero de' Medici, recaptured the city and the Medici family returned to Florence. And soon after, in 1513, Giovanni was elected pope and became Leo X. After he became the new pope, Florence was governed by his younger brother Giuliano de' Medici, but their nephew and Piero's son Lorenzo II soon took over in 1516. When Leo X was elected, King François I of France wanted to strengthen his ties with this new pope. Leo X also welcomed the alliance with France. A marriage alliance was a typical way this was done. The Pope also wanted to strengthen the Medici family's power and prestige through this union. Lorenzo was the Pope's nephew, and Madeleine was King François' cousin. The two were married in 1518 in Amboise, France. The wedding ceremony was arranged by François I. King François was fond of Renaissance art and culture from Italy, and he had hired Leonardo da Vinci some years earlier. He had Da Vinci plan and prepare wedding decorations and celebrations, and after their marriage, the couple moved back to Florence. Madeline was soon pregnant, and Caterina was born in Florence in 1519, but unfortunately for the newborn, both her parents died of illnesses within a month of her birth. The French king, François I, was quite fond of her mother Madeline and wanted to have Caterina raised at the French court. But her great-uncle, Leo X, declined this offer, preferring to raise her in Italy. The thought was that Caterina would eventually marry Giuliano's son and Caterina's uncle, Ippolito. Caterina was the sole descendant of the senior line of the family descending from Piero, and Leo X wanted to keep this bloodline and any claims that go with it within the family. So the Palazzo Riccardi, which had been home to the Medici family for generations, became Caterina's home. She was initially raised by her grandmother and other members of the Medici family. Cardinal Giulio de' Medici had assisted his cousin Pope Leo X in managing the Catholic Church from Rome, and he also helped Leo exercising control over Florence from afar. And after Leo X's death, Giulio was elected pope and assumed the name Clement VII. Pope Clement exercised even greater authority over Florence, but during his tenure, Florence faced a series of calamities. The biggest challenge was the War of the League of Cognac. This was a war between the Habsburgs on one side, with the Holy Roman Emperor Karl V at the top, and the League of Cognac, which was an alliance that included the Pope, France, and England. The Republic of Florence was also part of this League of Cognac. Unfortunately, the League suffered a series of defeats in the Italian peninsula. In 1527, Karl V gathered a force of 14,000 and marched to Rome, which would culminate in the event known as the Sack of Rome. Clement VII had to gather all his forces to defend Rome, including the Medici forces and mercenaries from Florence. This left Florence vulnerable, and this power vacuum allowed anti-Medici factions to stage a rebellion, leading to the Medici family's second expulsion from the city. During this upheaval, most of the Medici family managed to flee, but young Caterina was left behind with her caretakers. Amid the chaos, Caterina was shuffled between various convents to evade the rebels, but eventually she was captured and held by the Florentine militia. The heir to the Medici, a young girl, was now in the hands of Florence's citizen army. Clement VII put up his last resistance at Bologna, but he could not stand against the overwhelming strength of the imperial forces, and in 1529 he ultimately surrendered to Emperor Karl V. When the news that the Pope surrendered to the Emperor reached Florence, the citizens of Florence was outraged. His surrender left Florence, which was still resisting the imperial forces, in a dire situation. The Florentine citizens felt betrayed by the Pope and the Medici family, and took their frustration out on the only Medici still in their hands. They dragged the 11-year-old Caterina out to the public square. The mob demanded her to be given over to the angry soldiers, envisioning her likely rape and death as an act of retribution. Caterina's life hung by a thread. But at this critical moment, an elder of Florence intervened. Standing against the mob, he reminded them of the brutal truth. Caterina was Florence's last bargaining chip. The Medici will return to Florence with the emperor's forces, and, with Caterina still in their hands, the Pope may agree to a deal. Their own lives may be doomed, but their families may survive in return for Caterina's safety. But if they kill her now, what hope do they have to avoid the sack of the city? The crowd became quiet. His words reminded them of the brutal reality of their situation. To ensure the least harm, they realized the importance of keeping Caterina safe, and Caterina narrowly survived this harrowing ordeal that day. Florence ultimately surrendered, and Clement VII returned to the city. As soon as he entered the city, the first thing he did was to find Caterina. And when he did, he was overcome with emotion and wept as he held her close. For 2 years, she was left alone in Florence, the only remaining direct descendant of the senior line of the Medici family was left to suffer in the hands of the rebels. And Clement VII vowed to protect her from any further hardship. Determined to secure her future, he decided to find her a best match for marriage possible. When Leo X was alive, he wanted to have Caterina marry Ippolito, thereby uniting Piero's line with Giuliano's line. But things had changed by the time Clement VII assumed power. Ippolito had entered the priesthood and was now a cardinal, so marriage with Ippolito was no longer an option. Another potential match was Alessandro, who was in reality Clement's son. But recall how he was claimed by Lorenzo II as his son, at least legally? Because of that, Alessandro was Caterina's brother, at least legally. So this made their marriage impossible. So none of the surviving male members of the family being an option, Clement looked for a candidate from outside. Caterina's mother was from the French nobility, so France would be a good option. And it had the added benefit of allowing Clement VII to strengthen the ties with France. A union with French royal family would secure her future and bolster Medici influence on the international stage. Negotiations to arrange Caterina's marriage into the French royal family soon began. The key question was whether Caterina could marry into such an illustrious dynasty. François I of France was very supportive and positive about the idea of making Caterina his daughter-in-law. After all, Caterina's mother, Madeleine de la Tour d'Auvergne, had been a cherished cousin and friend whom François himself had helped marry into the Medici family. François had even expressed a desire to raise Caterina in the French court when Madeleine died. In addition, François was an enthusiastic patron of Italian artists and culture, which made Caterina, with her Italian upbringing, particularly appealing to him as a potential daughter-in-law. But others in the French court were not so taken to the idea. After all, the Medici family was not of noble blood. They were rich, sure, and had produced popes, yes, but they were still a merchant family that has risen to power through wealth and influence. Many at French court were appalled by the idea of this commoner's daughter joining the French royal family. Other than King François himself, virtually everyone in court opposed the match. And, to persuade his court, François thought of an idea. He would have Caterina marry his second son Henri, not his eldest son and heir to the throne, François. That way, it's not like Caterina would become the wife of the Dauphin and eventually the queen. No. The most she will ever become would be the Duchess of Orleans as the wife of the younger brother of the king. With this compromise, the French nobles accepted the match, chuckling and commenting that, the king really likes the Italians. François I also had his reasons for pursuing this marriage. He believed that if the Clement VII retained his position as pope for a considerable period, Caterina's connection to the pope could be used to strengthen French influence over the papacy. This influence, in turn, might help France reclaim Milan or achieve other political goals. Furthermore, Clement VII promised an enormous dowry to secure the match because he also realized that the balance between the bride's family and the groom's family is a little bit lopsided, to say the least. The sizable dowry placated the French court, and everyone eventually agreed that this was a lucrative agreement for France too. So, Caterina was betrothed to Henri, the second son of François I. In 1533, the 14-year-old Caterina was sent to the French royal court to marry Henri, who was also 14. At the time, no one imagined that Henri would eventually ascend to the throne, making Caterina a queen. But as unlikely as it was, that's what happened in the end. And we will see how that happened in our next video, so please like and subscribe to continue receiving our stories from history. Also, check out our playlist for the series on other countries and periods. It really helps a small channel like us.